So here we have two types of data that rasters can represent. The first is continuous data, and this is numerical and divisible. So continuous data are represented on the real number scale. That's the set of all numbers. So they belong to the set of all numbers. So that means a continuous variable has the capability of taking on any number along the number line, be it a rational or irrational number. This example here is one of elevation, also called a DEM, and that stands for digital elevation model. So digital elevation model, or DEM. Some people say DEM is another way to say that particular thing. And in this case, elevation is represented in each cell, and a color scale is used to represent differences in the magnitude of elevation. In this case, the blue, dark blue, is high elevation, and the greenish is low. Secondly, we have categorical data. In here, the cells also contain numbers, but the numbers themselves have no numeric meaning. They are simply codes to represent differences of some kind of thing that is observed in each cell of that raster. So this is also called discrete or discontinuous data. So categorical data is discrete or discontinuous. This example shows surficial deposit types. And each surficial deposit type has a corresponding color. The computer still has to use numbers to represent those things, but the numbers are just used to differentiate between different soil types. This is what a continuous field looks like if we looked at the numbers within the cells. So this little ghost image of a raster on top of these cells, and then I look at the actual values in here. That's the first value, that's the second value, the third value, etc. And so we see values like 115, 122, 130, 36, etc. And these represent a continuous variable. In this case, integers are used to represent that continuous variable because the recording of the variable or measurement of the variable for this raster was not accurate enough to hold decimal places. So the precision of the number used is 0 decimal places, so it's an integer value. But the variable itself is still a continuous variable, even though it doesn't have decimal points. It has the capacity, theoretically, to contain decimal points. And so we call that a continuous field. Elevation and temperature are good examples of a continuous field. Continuous fields generally show slow changes across space. There's frequently or infrequently going to be very sharp discontinuities in a continuous variable, but they can still exist. Think of elevation, for example. Elevation generally changes slowly over space, unless you find yourself in front of a cliff. That's a discontinuity in elevation, where elevation suddenly changes rapidly from high to very low. Most rasters that are digital elevation models, for example, and that's just the 2.5D representation, so 2.5 dimensional representation, and it's 2.5D because it shows a surface rather than a volume, which would be 3D. So if it showed the whole volume here, or some volume like so, then that would be a 3-dimensional representation. But it's 2.5D. And this is just examples of looking at a digital elevation model. Again, colors here, high to low. You can see that readily on the 2.5D representation. And it changes slowly over space. There's no discontinuities in this example. Another example of a continuous variable would be the concentration of some pollutant, like nitrogen dioxide, in the atmosphere, a major pollutant that is not good for human health. Other types of continuous variables we see here. These are just ones showing different things in Ontario. And you'll see this in exercise 3.4 when you do it, because you'll be playing with those type of variables. Mean annual precipitation and number of frost-free days. Here, colors, red means high and blue means low. Then we have discontinuous or categorical field variables. These can be again measured using any number type. Most likely though, 99.9% of the time, a categorical layer will contain cell values that are integers, where each integer value that is different, each unique integer value, is representing a different thing that has been observed at a cell location in space. So the numbers themselves are used to store things and to differentiate between, let's say, alluvial deposits, loamy alluvial deposits versus a different one here like marsh. So they would have different numbers representing those things in the cells. But the numbers themselves never have numeric meaning. And this is something you must know. So you must know that because the computer doesn't. The computer will allow you to do numeric operations with a categorical layer. And you won't get an error, but what you're doing is wrong. So it could be anything that is represented categorically. So you must know the theme and the type of data that you're working with to understand whether it can be amenable to certain processes in GIS, but not others. So here we see an example for the sandy loam coarse gravelly, and that's the light purple here, just a random color assigned to it. And if we look at the value of that in the table, we see that all the cells which are sandy loam coarse and cobbly, or coarse and cobbly, yes, right there, are value 302. So they all have the same numeric value, and that's simply different from a different numeric value. So marsh would not have the number 302, but it could be the number 1. And these are just codes again. Even though they're numeric, we know by understanding the type of data we're working with that the numbers have no numeric meaning. Here, other examples of categorical rasters. We have land use in both of these, and we can have sometimes the same colors. The colors don't mean anything. They're just used to represent the differences. It's so, for example, here we see the green is forest in A, and dark green is forest, mixed forest, upland in B. So they're not the exact same meaning, even though the same colors are there in these two rasters. Colors are just randomly assigned by default in ArcGIS Pro and many other GIS software. And we can see that we have different things in each of these. For example, there's no built up land in this one. The closest thing would be developed, low intensity residential, or developed commercial industrial transportation. And in the first case A here, it's just called built up, and it's dark black. They're also black over here, but they have a different meaning. And if we were to try and use these two data sets together, we'd somehow have to figure out what corresponds to what, and if the actual meanings mean the same thing. And this is part of the field of study of domain ontologies within GIS. So ontologies and semantics. So sometimes semantics can be the same. So both of these could mean built-up area. If they were black and black in the other, somebody just might have by chance called them both built up. But we have to ask ourselves, do the black areas in A and B really represent the same meaning of thing? And sometimes they don't, even if they have the same name. So they can have the same semantic form, but a different ontologic form in terms of the meaning. And this is a big issue in combining data or multiple data sets for some project in GIS. You have to say, well, even though they might have the same legend, do they mean the same things? And that often requires investigation before you can put them together into one data set to use for analysis. So that's a bit of an aside from what we're looking at here, but it's a nice thing to remember and to think about.